So we've covered the glial cells, we've covered the central versus the peripheral nervous system. Now we're going to move into neuron anatomy. That is the star of the nervous system. These are probably the most famous nervous system cell of any of these cells. This is probably the one you've heard of. In fact, is there anybody in here that has not ever heard of a neuron? Okay, so, yeah, all right. So all of you have heard of neurons. Oligodendrocytes, not so much. Neurons, yeah. Neurons are pretty darn small compared to the glial cells that surround them, but they serve an outsized, important role. So, size-wise, they're small. They could be extraordinarily long and thin, but they are not as, for lack of a better word, thick as the other cells. They're capable of sending electric signals and chemical signals. So they can send an electrical charge from one point in your body to another. They can also send chemical signals from one point in your body to the other. Electrical signals do, in fact, travel faster. I will go through the structure of the neuron a little bit later, but I want to give you just a brief overview, and then we'll go into lots of depth. Basically, when you're looking at a neuron, you've got three big parts of it. You're going to have what's called the soma, or the body of the cell. That'll have the nucleus in it. It controls the neuron. You'll have an axon, which is where you send signals down. And you have dendrites that receive signals. So basically, think of this almost like an antenna and then a transmitter. Information comes in at the dendrites, processed a bit in the soma, but almost immediately sent down the axon. And that axon can be really, really, really long. That's a dinosaur. I drew it myself. Pretty proud there. I used a mouse, as if you couldn't tell. That's pretty good for, right? I even went three-dimensional. I put two little back legs in there, too. These neurons are very, very highly specialized and have differing lengths. Some have run down the length of the entire leg. Because you think about it, you'll have a connection point because you've got a central nervous system, the spine. Then you have your peripheral nervous system. So you could have one neuron moving from your spine all the way down your leg. In fact, I'm willing to bet some of you guys at some point in your life. So when you think of nerves, nerves are basically bundles of neurons. You've pinched a nerve before, yeah? You've done that? Sucks, right? You ever notice that if you pinch a nerve up in your neck, suddenly there's something wrong with your fingertips? Or you pinch a nerve in your hip, and there's, I don't know, some weird feeling in the arch of your foot. It's because these things travel so long your body, the length of your body. In fact, with dinosaurs, they were gigantic, right? They actually had two nerve ganglia. They had a ganglia up in their head, their brain. And they had another one down at their hips to process all that information so that they couldn't, basically they would have a response faster. Why don't we have that? We're not that big. Our travel time is extraordinarily fast. Neurons are, in fact, the longest lived cells in your body. They live for as long as you do. Until you kill them off with various, chemical treatments. Or damage from car crashes. They are amitotic. A, of course, means no. So they do not reproduce mitotically. You start off with a certain number of neurons. You do have stem cells as you're developing, obviously. We've talked about going from a zygote to a blastula to a gastrula. Over time, once you're born and you've basically completed cell development, you're not going to get new neurons. You get new connections between neurons. They're able to form new networks. But you want to protect the neurons that you have. They are irreplaceable with our current technology. Now, that being said, we talked about stem cell treatments and such. Stem cells, there is a lot of potential in using stem cells as pluripotent cells to replace neurons. There are currently restrictions on the way that you can use stem cells in medical technology. But who knows what will happen in 10, 15, 20 years. Neurons have an extremely high metabolism. They require a lot of energy. Roughly 25% of the calories you take in are used by the neurons in their brain. Your brain is not very efficient. It uses up a lot of energy. You got to keep it going. You might feel dumber when when you don't have as much food. You guys find it hard to concentrate in things when you don't have food? No? You're fine without food? So neurons are important. They're irreplaceable. You need them. Structurally, like we said, you've got the cell body, also known as the soma. The soma is going to provide life support. It's got the nucleus. It's providing proteins. It's it's the basic cell structures. Branching off of the soma, you have dendrites. Dendrites are going to receive information. Because if these neurons start to create a vast net, you'll have information coming in, being passed to the dendrite, and then sent along. And it's going to be sent along the axon. The axon has these myelin sheaths in order to allow it to send information farther without degrading. So if you put two neurons next to each other, basically it would be dendrite, soma, axon, leading to a dendrite, soma, axon, leading to a dendrite, soma, axon. You create networks this way. So far, so good? So neurons are usually classified based on how many projections they have. Projections, otherwise known as neurites. Most have at least one axon and two dendrites. So here you have an anaxonic neuron. It means it lacks an axon. It is purely dendrite. What is this going to do? What's its whole job? Right, it receives information but doesn't transmit information. You might have some that are bipolar. Bipolar might have, obviously, two poles, right? So these guys might have an axon and a dendrite. They receive and transmit. Some of them are unipolar. Unipolar are kind of weird. This one looks like it has two poles, but it's only one because it's projecting out and going in two directions. And then some are multipolar, they have a lot of dendrites and they have a single axon. A lot of ways to receive information, one way to send. So we just went through this. Multipolar, there are more than two neurites. Bipolar, they have an axon and dendrite extending to both ends, having two poles. Unipolar has a neurite coming out, and then it's going to go in two different directions. And then, multipolar have lots of dendrites and a single axon. Oh, I did? What was the last one then? Oh, and anaxonic, thank you. Anaxonic has no axon and is purely used for receiving information. So far, so good? Lots going on there. You guys know that I want you to see big picture more than memorize tiny little things. Sensory information typically travels in one direction. That is, think about the way your eye works. Information comes to your eye, and then needs to get processed in your brain. Your brain is then not sending information back to your eye to send out to the world. It's not like you've got these laser beams you shoot out in order to interact with your environment. Cool? So information comes in and goes in a single direction. Motor neurons, those neurons that are going to attach to your muscles, are usually multipolar. So they're going to transmit information to your brain and receive information from your brain in order to cause something to happen. This leads to what are known as reactions. Bipolar neurons are typically used in specialized sensors, so sight, smell, touch, so mechanoreceptors, sensing heat, sensing pressure. But they don't send information back to that organ that did the detecting. So we've got a lot of different shaped neurons, all of which are supported by glial cells. Questions or concerns? Then we have this other neuron, and I do want to talk a little bit more about this, called interneurons. These are multipolar, so they've got many different dendrites coming in and an axon going out. Their job is transferring information between sensors and then back to motor neurons. Basically, if you touch something hot, before you're too hot, I don't know, I have a stupid cat. I had a stupid cat, it died, but not of this. It jumped on the stove when the stove was hot. Like the burner was on, and the cat's like, I want to get up there, and we're like, don't jump on the stove. The cat doesn't listen to me because the cat doesn't understand English. This cat jumps up on the stove, experiences extreme heat in its paws, and immediately jumps off the stove. It didn't have to think about, my paws hurt right now. I would like to jump off. There was an immediate reaction. For you guys, if you've ever been cut or if you've been burned by something, your hand immediately withdraws. It does not want to be hurt anymore before your brain can process the damage. Does that make sense? I assume you've been in this situation before? That's due to the interneurons. Basically, you're going to have there are nodal points along your body where information might get sent from your hand, up your arm, towards your central nervous system. And before it goes up to the brain, a signal is immediately sent back that says retract. At the same point, that signal continues on to the brain where it's processed and you're like, oh, that's hot. But you have a faster reaction with these interneurons. Took me a while to figure it out. That's a snail. Right? Pretty nice. So let's put this all together. We have sensation at a unipolar sensory neuron. You're going to get information in. Let's just say, I don't know, a touch. Fingertips. The information is then transmitted up the axon. The axon is wrapped in Schwann cells, heading up toward the central nervous system. So, sensory neuron sends a message up an axon. There it's going to be passed to an multipolar interneuron at the connection between the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, the spinal cord. Now, at that point, you got two options. The signal continues up to the brain to be processed, so your body can say, what do I think about this? And at the same time, and just as quickly, a pulse is sent back down an axon toward the muscles in your hand, motor neurons. That motor neuron can cause an involuntary reaction while your brain is processing the sensation. Make sense? So your brain processes this information, and you can then make a conscious decision. And again, that's the part I don't know how it works, and I don't think anybody does. But there is a decision that is made. You can, because you're a conscious being, make the decision to put your hand back in whatever was causing pain. People hurt themselves all the time on purpose. You can overcome these most involuntary reactions. So you have this back and forth discussion within your nervous system that happens, well, I don't want to say at the speed of light, but it happens extraordinarily quickly at the speed of electricity. Do you have questions on how that occurs? You have a sensor, sends a sensory neuron that sends information up to the an interneuron at your spinal cord that sends information either back to down a motor neuron where it causes an involuntary reaction, and up to the brain where you can cause a conscious change. From your brain, you'll send a pulse back down your central nervous system, back out your peripheral nervous system to your muscles to either reinforce that change. Oh, I'm going to hold my hand now and hope it feels better, or, I don't know, damage yourself some more. So we know this works. That is the way the process occurs. What we don't understand is that whole consciousness thing. Because in this one case, and actually in several cases in biology, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Individually, we know what each cell does. Individually, we know how each cell does it. But from those individual cells, we have not yet pieced together how consciousness occurs, how you get that little voice in your head that is there and is not there at the same time. It's kind of weird. I have no idea. Psychologists have ideas. Neurologists, they have ideas, but I don't know what's the best. Sorry. If a single dendrite was the length of a football field, so your axons, the length of a football field, it would take 1 second to send the signal from one end to the other. So pretty fast. You're not the length of a football field. So these signals travel extraordinarily quickly in your body and allow for very quick reaction times, but not perfect reaction times. There's an old experiment where if you took a piece of paper or a dollar or something and you dropped it, it's hard to catch because between the time it takes for your eye to recognize that the dollar has dropped and for the signal to get down to your finger to close, then it's just not enough time. It's kind of interesting. We'll explore things like that when we look at the lab this week. Your reaction times, how you can perceive differences, where your mechanical receptors are located and such like that. So that will be on Wednesday. So there we go. That is how the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system are linked together. We talked a lot about how signals travel from one neuron to the next. The next lecture is going to be all about the brain itself and the different components of the brain, how that brain may integrate some of that information. And I'm going to give you the rough overview for an introductory biology student, not the in-depth analysis you might expect in like an anatomy and physiology class where you're also dissecting a brain at the same time.